Welcome back, super friends. Today we are going to find the quotient with decimals and powers of 10. So that means that we're going to be moving our decimal over to the left with our powers of 10s that we see. So what you'll need for today is your math notebook or folder, pencil to write with, and don't forget that super brain of yours. Stay tuned for the video. All right, super friends, we are going to find the quotient for decimals and powers of 10. Every time we deal with powers of 10, I like to refresh our memory on what the different powers of 10 will mean when we see them and how it translates to what we're doing. So before, when it was multiplying, we dealt with a table that showed us multiplying by powers of 10. Right now, since we're dividing, we're going to deal with a table that shows us how to divide by powers of 10. Since we're also dealing with decimals, we're going to see what that powers of 10 looks like in decimal form and what it would look like to divide that also. So starting off, let's focus on the left-hand side of our table that's already filled in. We have our powers of 10, which we have all the ones that we're familiar with. And then if we're dividing by powers of 10, we're simply just dividing by the value or the power of 10, which you see here. So I'll go over it to give you time to copy it down. We would have the 10 to the 0 power, which equals 1, because the 0 power means that there's going to be no zeros in your value. So that's just equal to 1. So if we were dividing by that, it would be divide by 1 or divide by 10 to the power of 0. Now, when it comes to 10 to the power of 1, that means that there's 1 0 in the value, so it would equal 10, and we would just say divide by 10 or divide by 10 to the power of 1. Now, for the 10 to the power of 2, that means that there's 2 zeros in the value, so we divide by 100 or 10 to the second power. 10 to the third power is the value of 1,000. We would divide by 1,000 or 10 to the third power. With 10 to the fourth power, it would be 10,000 as the value. If we were dividing, we would just divide by 10,000 or 10 to the power of 4, which means what? Anytime we divide by the power, or if we divide by 10,000 or 1,000, we're dealing with decimals, we're going to move our decimal to the left. Whenever we're dividing, we're moving the decimal to the left. We will go over that again. 10 to the fifth power is 100,000. We divide by 100,000 or by 10 to the fifth power. And then lastly, our next one would be 10 to the sixth power, which is 1 million. We divide by 1 million, or we would divide by 10 to the sixth power. Now, let us focus on the right-hand side of the table. So we already dealt with our powers of 10 and dividing by powers of 10. Let's deal with multiplying by decimals, which means that we can also divide. So I have our place value pulled up again, and this is the power of 10 when we're dealing with decimals. So 1 over 10 is our 10th place. I'm going to go ahead and write that. It's our 10th place, and that's going to look like 0.1 if we have it as a decimal. And if we're multiplying by that 0.1, that still means that we're dividing. So we'd be multiplying by 0.1. And that still means divide. Now let's go ahead and do the next one. Let's fix that. Divide. Okay, now the next one is the 100th place. Let's spell that. That's a big one. Again, and this decimal looks like what? 0.01. That means it is 2. The 1 would be 2 places after the decimal. Just like for the tenths, the 1 is 1 place after the decimal. For the hundredths, it's 2 places after the decimal. So this one would be multiplying by 0.01, which also means divide. And then lastly, we have our thousandths. That's as high as we go in 5th grade. Or I guess as small as we go, because decimals are small. That's as small as we go in 5th grade, and that would look like 0.001, because the 3 zeros here show me that the number will be 3 places after the decimal. And again, we would be multiplying by that, and it would be 0.001, which also means to divide. So now we're going to keep this in mind when we're dealing with the rest of our problems that we're doing today, because these are going to help us realize what we're doing. Are we moving our decimal over to the left, or are we crossing out zeros because they're just whole numbers? So that's what we're going to deal with. On the left hand side is if it's whole numbers. On the right hand side is if we have decimals. Let's go to our first example. All right, now in this case, we have a decimal and our power of 10. So it says, find the quotient of 2.88 divided by 10 to the second power. Now, normally, we know anytime we see divide by 10 to the second power, we are moving our decimal to the left. Let's go ahead and write that again. When dividing, move decimal left. And I'll show an arrow to show you what left means. So that's what we're going to be doing right now if we have a decimal, or if we don't have a decimal. If the decimal's not there, we can always make a decimal happen and put it in the correct place for our answer. So let's go ahead and get started. I know that I'm going to be moving my decimal 2 places to the left. So move 2 places left. And let's get started. So I like to rewrite my number because it helps my brain. So my 2.88. And knowing me with my jumps, I like to make sure I have enough space so I can pay attention to what I'm doing. So I start right where my decimal already is, which is between the 2 and the 8. So I'm starting here and I'm moving it 1 place left, and then I need another place left. And you see my arrow move to the left, and that's where the decimal is now going to be. So the decimal is no longer going to be between the 2 and the 8. The decimal is now going to be 2 spaces in front of the 2. So this empty spot here, that means I'm going to put a placeholder there, which is 0. I just like to call them placeholders. So now I have decimal 0288. That is my new answer now. So let me rewrite that. My answer is decimal 0288. Miss Joyce, can you put a decimal or can you put a 0 in front of the decimal? Oh, of course you can. That works for me too. You can have it this way, or you can have it without the decimal. I meant the 0 in front. Both of these are the answers. All right, let's go on to the next example. Find the quotient. 525 divided by 100. So in this case, we're still going to be moving our decimal left, but there's no decimal there, right? So what we'll do is we're going to place a decimal at the end of the number. So start here. And then, since we're moving to the left 2 places because of these zeros, we are going to move that decimal that we started at to the place that we needed to move it. So let's start. 1 place, 2 places. Now it ends here. And here. So now what does that number look like? It looks like 5 decimal 2 5, because that decimal where we started is not going to be there anymore. And that's our answer. That one was pretty simple. You just had to know where to start so that you can move your decimal where it needed to end up. All right, next example is solve the equation below. We have 4,560 times 1,000ths. So remember like what we did earlier? If we are, I'm going to go back so we can refer to it. If we are multiplying by 1,000th, that means that we're going to divide. So that basically means we're dividing by 10 to the third power, because we're dealing with division of 1,000. That's what that means. That thousandths place means that you're dividing by 1,000, and that place value will end up in the thousandths place. That's all that means. They're very related. I know a lot of the times we get confused and we don't want to believe that it's basically the same thing, but instead of multiplying by 1,000, we're going to be dividing by 1,000 so we can get the place value to be where we need it to be. Now, looking at this already, guys, I'm going to show you the quick, easy way, or I can show you the way that might take like one more step longer. They're both easy. What we're doing is basically seeing, okay, how many places after the decimal do I have here? Just 3? Okay, so now I'm going to rewrite my number, 4, 5, 6, 0, and then I'm going to place my decimal so that it has only 3 places after it also. That's basically all that you did. And if you don't believe that way, if this way doesn't feel good to you and you're like, no, I need to actually see what I did, that's fine. Rewrite your number. Remember, we got to place our decimal at the end if there's not one there. So start here. And then remember, this translates to divide by 10 to the third power, which means I'm moving my decimal 3 places to the left. So let's start moving it. 1, 2, 3, and it goes right there between the 4 and the 5. So now my answer is 4.560. I've had questions before where someone will ask me, oh, do I have to put that 0 at the end? If the 0 is in the number, it stays in the number. You do not have to take it out. Don't take it out. There's no reason to take out that 0. So our answer would be this. So both ways that you can solve it. So it's really, really simple. You're just thinking of that decimal as, okay, divide by whatever that number is, whatever that value is, so that you can get the same answer. All right, let's do our last example. All right, so it says choose the equations for which a equals 10 to the second power makes the equation true. Select all that apply. So that means that we're taking wherever we see an A, we're putting 10 to the second power. And then we have to make sure that where it says equal, that it's true. If it's not true, then we don't want it. So we want the ones that are true if we divide by 10 to the second power. Okay. Simple enough. Let's start plugging and chugging. All right, so this A is going to be 10 to the second power. That means that I'm dividing by 2. Oh, this one already has a decimal. Thank goodness. So I'm going to start where the decimal already is and then move to the left 1, 2 times. That decimal will go right in front of the 4. So that answer would look like decimal point 498, which looks like what I see here. So these two are the same. This would be true. Miss Choice, but that doesn't have a 0 in front of the decimal. You can always put 1. It doesn't matter. That's just saying that there's 0. There's no number in the ones place, which is true. There's no number in the ones place but a 0. That's nothing. So those are the same. That's what we want. Let's look at B. 8,691.2 divided by our handy dandy 10 to the second power. And it should equal 86.912. Let's see if that's what we're going to get. So right now, our decimal in the original problem, our decimal is between the 1 and the 2, but we have to move it 2 places to the left. So let's start. 1, 2 places to the left. Up. Now it looks like it's between the 6 and the 9 like it did in the answer. Let's rewrite it. 8, 6, decimal point, 9, 1, 2. That's what that turned into, and that's what this looks like. So these two are the same. B is what we want. Let's look at C. 1.4 divided by, handy dandy, 10 to the second power. So we need our decimal to be in between the first 2 zeros. So we'll see what happens there. Let's figure this one out. So if I'm starting between the 1 and the 0, let's move over to the left twice. 1, 2. Our decimal will be here. What goes here? A placeholder, because that's an empty spot. So now my answer looks like 0.014. Does that look like what we need it to look like? No, it does not, because the decimal that we need is going to be decimal 0014, but that's not what we have here. So these are not equal. Not equal. That's what that means. The equal sign with the cross in it means not equal. So we don't want that. All right, let's look at D. D says 0.3 divided by, of course, 10 to the second power, because that's what we've been doing, equals 0.003. So let's see if that's what we can get. So it's starting between the 0 and the 3. Let's move it over 2 places. 1, 2. What goes in that blank space? Placeholder. Let's rewrite it. So that's going to be decimal point 003. Does that look like what we need in our answer? Yes, it does. The decimal point is before 2 zeros and the 3. That is the same. So that's true. Our last example says 453.5 divided by, of course, 10 to the second power, and it's going to equal 45.35. Let's see if we're going to get that same answer. Looking at it already, it looks like the decimal just moved 1 place, and we're moving our decimal 2 places. So I don't think it's going to be a match, but let's double check ourselves. So starting between the 3 and the 5, let's move the decimal point 1, 2 places over. So now if we rewrite our answer, the decimal point would be between the 4 and the 5, and then it would have the 3, 5 after. Does that look like what we needed in our answer? No, it does not, because that answer has the decimal point between the 5 and the 3 instead of between the 4 and the 5. So not equal. All right, so just as a review, if you see any division of power of 10 or division of a whole number like 100 or 1,000 or 10 or anything like that, that means we're moving our decimal point to the left. If you don't see a decimal point there, always start your decimal point at the very end of the whole number so that you can move it left. If you see a case where it's like example C, where we are multiplying by the decimal, just turn that into divide by 10 to the third power. That's all that is. You're just turning that decimal point of whatever it is into a power of 10, and you're dividing by that, so that you could still just move your decimal point to the left and call it a day. So all of these are very simple. We are dividing. Even if it says multiply by decimal, you are still dividing. Use this notes to help you with your problems.